Welcome to the Deep Dive. We always appreciate you sending us your sources. We love to extract these key insights, the surprising facts, the stuff that really gets you thinking, so you can be well-informed quickly without feeling like you're drowning in information.
It's all about making those connections and finding what clicks, right?
Exactly. And this deep dive, it's all for you.
That's right. Today, we're diving into the work of Professor Rosalind Picard, a true pioneer in effective computing and AI. We'll be drawing mainly from a transcript of her interview on the Seen and Unseen podcast, where she really opens up about her unique perspective and shares her journey, which is fascinating.
So our mission today is to really unpack the world of AI, go beyond the hype, and grasp what's actually happening. We want to understand the potential for good, but let's also address those concerns about the potential downsides. And we get to do all this through the lens of Professor Picard. Not only is she an expert in the field, she also brings this really thoughtful, faith-based perspective to the table, which adds another layer to our understanding.
Absolutely. So let's get started. Professor Picard's background is really impressive. She's the founder and director of the Effective Computing Research Group at MIT. She's been at the forefront of developing technology that can understand and respond to human emotion, which is pretty groundbreaking. And of course, her expertise extends to machine learning and AI in general.
What I find particularly interesting is her personal story. She talks about her adult conversion to Christianity, and it seems like this wasn't just a surface-level change. It really had a deep impact on her priorities and how she approaches her work. She even mentions that her initial drive, maybe that ambition to make a name for herself, transformed into this desire to use technology to genuinely help others.
Right, a true shift in motivation driven by her faith. It's a remarkable example of how personal values can shape a professional path, right? And it brings us to the heart of her work, effective computing. Now, for those unfamiliar with the term, effective computing, with an A, essentially deals with technology that's all about emotions, how it relates to them, arises from them, or even influences them.
So we're talking about computers understanding our feelings. That's wild.
In a way, yes. When Professor Picard first started exploring this field, the focus was on making machines more emotionally intelligent. The goal was to improve how humans and computers interact by allowing machines to recognize and respond to the emotions that humans are expressing.
Okay, so picture a computer that can sense if you're getting frustrated with it or if you're really engaged with what it's doing. That's pretty cool.
Exactly. And the early approaches to this involved using machine learning to find patterns in all sorts of data. Think about it. Facial expressions from video, the tone of your voice, your posture, even physiological signals like heart rate. The idea was to connect these signals to the emotions that people would label them with.
So like training a computer to recognize what sadness looks like, what an angry voice sounds like.
Precisely. Researchers would feed the computer tons of data, essentially saying, this is what happiness looks like, this is what boredom sounds like, and so on. The computer would learn to pick up on those patterns and then be able to apply that knowledge to new information.
And has that actually been successful?
Oh, absolutely. Professor Picard mentions that facial expression recognition systems, which stemmed from this early work, are now being used by more than a third of Fortune 500 companies. That's huge. Businesses are clearly seeing the value in understanding how people feel.
Wow. And it's not just about reading faces anymore, right? She talks about major tech companies having entire effective computing groups working on things like analyzing customer sentiment from online interactions, like figuring out what people are clicking on, the language they're using, trying to gauge their overall mood.
Right, and they're even applying it to employee well-being. For example, using AI to manage workloads in call centers based on the emotional tone of customer interactions.
So maybe if someone's dealing with a really angry customer, the system might try to give them a break or switch to a different type of call.
Exactly. It's about trying to proactively manage stress and prevent burnout, which is really interesting. But there's a really important distinction that Professor Picard emphasizes here, and it's the difference between emotions that are displayed outwardly and the emotions that are actually being felt.
Okay, so someone might be smiling, but inside, they're feeling completely different.
Precisely. While computers are becoming really good at analyzing all those external cues we talked about, facial expressions, tone of voice, even tiny physiological changes, they're not actually feeling those emotions.
So they're interpreting data, but not experiencing feelings.
Exactly. Their interpretation still relies on how we humans understand those signals. She uses the analogy of a weather app predicting rain based on cloud patterns. The app doesn't feel the rain right.
That's a great way to put it. And this ties into that whole debate about AI becoming sentient. Is it really possible?
Well, Professor Picard directly addresses that. She's very clear that current AI doesn't have self-awareness. It doesn't know things in the same way we do, and anything it does is ultimately based on the programming and data we give it. So that idea of AI suddenly becoming conscious and taking over the world.
That's more science fiction than science fact.
That's what she argues. She says any autonomy we see in AI today is granted by us and can be taken away. AI is not a living, evolving entity. Without humans, it would simply cease to function.
Okay, so those Terminator scenarios are probably not something we need to worry about anytime soon.
Not according to Professor Picard. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about her pioneering work with wearable technology. This is another fascinating area where she's made significant contributions to understanding emotion.
Wearables, like smartwatches and fitness trackers.
Exactly. Her interest in wearables stemmed from wanting to study people's emotional states in real-world situations outside of the artificial environment of a lab.
Because how you act in a lab might be very different from how you act in your everyday life.
Exactly. She even mentions this early device called a Cograph. Have you heard of that?
I haven't. What is it?
Well, it was developed by Manfred Kleins, who also coined the term cyborg, interestingly enough. It measured the subtle dynamics of how people pressed a button based on the idea that your emotional state would unconsciously influence those physical interactions.
So, like if you were stressed, you might press the button harder or differently than if you were relaxed.
Exactly. Professor Picard saw the significance of this, understanding that emotions manifest in so many ways beyond just facial expressions or tone of voice. It could be muscle tension, even the way you hold an object.
Like those subtle cues that reveal how someone's truly feeling, even if they're trying to hide it.
Right. And this realization led to a shift in research. It became about putting the lab on the person, as Professor Picard says. That meant developing wearable devices that could comfortably measure physiological data outside of a controlled lab setting.
But those early wearables must have been pretty clunky, right?
Oh, absolutely. She even describes them as cumbersome, with wires and sensors attached with things like duct tape. But those early efforts laid the foundation for the sophisticated wristwatch sensors we have today, measuring heart rate, skin conductance, movement, temperature.
And that technology ultimately found its way into the smartwatches that so many people wear now.
Exactly, including those developed by Professor Picard's own company, Empatica. And what's amazing is how this wearable technology led to some truly unexpected and life-saving applications. She shares her experience working with individuals on the autism spectrum and realizing that their emotional expressions and the way they experience stress were often misunderstood by others.
So their outward behavior wasn't always matching their internal feeling.
Right. And this led to the development of wearables specifically designed to help communicate when they were feeling distressed, to bridge that gap in understanding.
That's incredible. And then there's that amazing story about the accidental discovery of a physiological pattern that correlated with seizures.
Right, a specific physiological pattern in a non-speaking child with autism. That was a major turning point.
It led to the development of FDA-cleared wearable technology, now offered by Empatica, that can detect generalized tonic-clonic seizures. And this is huge because it can automatically alert caregivers and provide their GPS location, increasing the chances of survival and getting help quickly after a seizure.
It's a powerful example of how focusing on real human needs and listening to the communities we're trying to help can lead to life-changing innovation.
And that seems to be a driving force in Professor Picard's current research. She emphasizes the importance of learning from the people they aim to serve, like the epilepsy community's desire for more control over their seizures.
And they're now researching the use of wearable data to predict seizures with some very promising early results from a collaboration with the Mayo Clinic.
Wow, so imagine being able to know ahead of time that a seizure might be coming. That could be life-changing for so many people.
Absolutely. And their research is expanding even further, looking at patterns in physiological data related to other neurological conditions like migraines and even mental health conditions like depression and anxiety.
So trying to find those hidden signals that might give us a better understanding of these complex conditions.
Exactly. The goal is to identify factors that contribute to resilience and empower individuals by giving them more information and control over their health.
Now, another really fascinating aspect of Professor Picard's story is her personal faith journey. She talks about starting out with that kind of stereotypical academic perspective, dismissing religion as something for people who aren't intellectual.
Right. She had that skepticism that's common in academic circles.
But then she started interacting with some family friends who were both intelligent and deeply religious. They invited her to church, and while she admits she wasn't exactly thrilled at the idea, something shifted for her.
She even jokes about trying to avoid going initially.
But eventually, she decided to actually engage with the Bible, starting with the book of Proverbs. And she was surprised by what she found there. It wasn't the simplistic, dogmatic stuff she had expected.
Right, she was encountering real wisdom.
That experience led her to read the entire Bible privately over the course of a year. And through that process, she came to believe in God, which, as she says, was not her original intention.
It's a powerful testament to the impact of actually engaging with something directly, without preconceived notions. And her exploration didn't stop there. She even delved into other world religions, really testing her newfound faith before ultimately embracing Christianity in her early college years.
And what's so striking is how she now integrates her faith with her scientific work. She says she sees no inherent conflict between the two, which is a huge shift from her earlier atheistic views.
And her faith really influences how she approaches her work, what she chooses to focus on.
Right. She talks about this evolution in her motivation within AI. Initially, it was about the intellectual challenge, creating machines that could rival or surpass human intelligence. But now, guided by her faith, she prioritizes using AI for good, for projects that benefit humanity and uphold human dignity.
It's not about replacing humans, but empowering them.
Exactly. And she finds inspiration in her faith and her church community to use AI to address injustice and support those who are most vulnerable. And what's so interesting is this kind of feedback loop she describes. The more she learns about the human brain and body through her scientific work, the more awe and wonder she feels, which in turn strengthens her faith.
She even shares that anecdote about a neurologist who became a Christian because of the sheer complexity she saw in the human brain.
And it's this idea of seeing the beauty and intricacy of creation as evidence for a creator. But even with this deep respect for the potential of technology, Professor Pickard is also very careful to distinguish between human and artificial intelligence. She acknowledges the impressive things that large language models like ChatGPT can do.
But she's firm in her belief that they're tools, not independent minds.
They can generate really sophisticated text based on the massive amount of data they've been trained on, but they don't truly understand what they're saying.
They lack that genuine comprehension, the emotional depth, the flexible, adaptable intelligence that even a young child has. She compares it to a lookup table. It might be incredibly complex and sophisticated, but is it truly intelligent?
So while AI can be incredibly powerful, it's still very different from human intelligence.
And Professor Pickard emphasizes the essential role humans play in shaping and guiding these AI models. We're the ones providing the data, the feedback, the direction.
Which brings us to some of the concerns and ethical considerations that she raises. She's worried about the potential for too much power and wealth being concentrated in the hands of a few companies or individuals developing AI, potentially leading to technologies that don't serve the needs of everyone.
And she pushes back against those narratives that fuel this fear of AI taking over and making humans obsolete. She argues that those narratives are not only inaccurate, but also harmful, because they distract us from having a more nuanced and productive conversation about the real impact of AI.
Right. It's not about replacing humans, it's about finding ways to use AI to enhance human capabilities and make life better.
She gives the example of AI assisting writers with brainstorming or overcoming writer's block. It's a tool, not a replacement.
But she's also clear about the need for careful consideration of the societal impact of AI and the importance of being proactive. She even uses the term AI malpractice to describe the potential for these systems to spread harmful or false information.
And then there's the whole ethical questions surrounding virtual AI companions. While they might have some benefits, like providing a safe space to practice social skills, there's also the risk of manipulation and potentially hindering real human connection.
Like, if someone becomes so attached to an AI companion that they neglect their relationships with actual people, that could be a problem.
Right. And it all comes back to the narratives we create around AI, the way we choose to use it, the values we embed in it.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the human choices behind it.
Exactly. And Professor Pickard is particularly concerned about the potential for misuse of AI by governments or corporations for things like surveillance and suppression. She draws a parallel to Oppenheimer and the responsibility that creators have for their creations.
It's a powerful reminder that we can't just blindly develop technology without thinking about the consequences.
And she stresses the importance of human values, accountability, and responsibility in guiding AI development. But as she points out, creating effective regulations is challenging in a global landscape where there's this sense of an AI arms race.
So how do we ensure that AI is used ethically when everyone's trying to get ahead?
Well, Professor Picard believes that education is key. It's about training the next generation of AI developers to prioritize creating technologies that genuinely make the world a better place. And she directly addresses those who portray AI as this inherently dangerous force, like summoning a demon.
Like we're inevitably headed for some kind of dystopian future where machines take over.
Right. But she argues that if AI leads to negative outcomes, it'll be because of the choices we made, the biases we programmed into it, or the harmful applications we allowed to proliferate.
So it's not about AI being inherently good or bad. It's about how we choose to use it.
Exactly. And she encourages us to shift away from fear and embrace a more hopeful perspective, to see AI as a tool that can empower us, created with empathy, and guided by human values and experience.
It's about constantly evaluating the human impact of AI and working to make it better.
And when asked where she finds her own sense of hope, she talks about the innate human desire to do good and use technology for positive purposes. She acknowledges our flaws, but also believes in our capacity for positive action and change. And ultimately, her faith provides her with a deep sense of hope, a belief in a larger purpose, and the possibility of restoration.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've explored Professor Picard's perspective on AI as this incredibly powerful tool with both the potential for immense good and the risk of harm. The key takeaway here is the crucial role of human intention and ethical considerations in shaping its development.
It's not about letting technology dictate our future. It's about making conscious choices about how we want to integrate it into our lives.
And it's about understanding that AI, for all its capabilities, is fundamentally different from human intelligence and consciousness. And through it all, Professor Picard offers this really hopeful and balanced vision, grounded in both her scientific expertise and her faith.
And gaining this nuanced understanding is more important than ever as AI becomes increasingly intertwined with our lives.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Given Professor Picard's emphasis on human values, what specific ethical considerations do you believe are most critical as AI continues to evolve? What responsibility do you, as an individual, have in influencing the narrative and direction of AI? Take some time to really think about these questions, and maybe even explore Professor Picard's interview further on the Seen and Unseen YouTube channel. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Okay, so today we're going to take a deep dive into some pretty wild ideas you've brought us. Stuff about how men and women spend money, some theories about debt, and this idea of minimalist living, and even a look at what a future run by AI might look like.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff. Your sources, mainly from a YouTube transcript you sent, lay out some really interesting arguments. I think we can pull out some real key takeaways, those surprising facts you mentioned, and hopefully get a good grasp on the perspective being offered on gender roles in the economy and this whole potential tech solution.
Right, and we know our listeners come from all kinds of backgrounds, so whether you're an expert on this stuff or just curious, don't worry, we're going to break it all down in a way that makes sense. No need for any jargon or anything like that.
Totally. The goal is to make it easy to follow.
So let's jump right in. This idea of consumer spending and gender, where do we even begin with that?
Well, it's often said that women control something like 80% of consumer spending, right?
Yeah, you hear that statistic a lot.
But your source makes a really interesting point that this isn't some kind of age-old truth. It's actually more of a modern trend, really reflecting how women are participating more in the workforce. So women as the primary spenders. It's a huge sign of how economic power is shifting.
Makes sense. If you think back historically, especially before, say, the second half of the 20th century, men were often the ones calling the shots financially, being the main breadwinners and all that.
Exactly.
So this 80% figure really underlines how much has changed. More women in the economy, the whole idea of who manages the money at home, it's all evolved.
Yeah. And as women's economic influence has grown, so has their impact on, everything that gets bought, really. And it's not just personal spending. This spans a huge range of household decisions, from groceries to like healthcare and everything in between.
You also brought up a really interesting point about debt, that something like 75% of debt in the U.S. is held by women. And at the same time, women are outpacing men in education. So how do these facts connect?
That's where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Your source points out that women are getting the majority of college degrees. We're talking around 60%.
Yeah.
Both for undergraduate and graduate degrees.
Wow.
But here's the thing. Even with more education, women, on average, still tend to earn less than men. So they might be taking on more student loan debt to get those degrees and then having a tougher time paying it back because they're not earning as much.
That's a crucial point, I think. Just because you have the qualifications doesn't automatically translate to equal financial success. And you also mentioned something about single men who aren't in relationships, this idea that they might be living more minimally, especially with all the talk about men, stepping back from dating apps and singles events.
Yeah, it raises an important question about what really drives spending. And your source kind of hints at this, the idea that men who aren't dating or in relationships might just spend less overall. No social pressures to, keep up appearances or impress anyone. So they might focus more on just their basic needs, saving money, or maybe hobbies that don't require a ton of spending.
It makes you wonder how different that is compared to men who are dating, who might be spending more on things like, I don't know, clothes or going out.
Totally. Like I said, it really seems like the whole dating game or the lack of it can have a real impact on how men choose to spend their money.
Right, which brings us back to this bigger picture of how gender, spending, and relationships all tie together. The source definitely backs up the idea that women are this major driving force in consumer spending, especially when it comes to households.
And it also touches on those societal expectations, right?
Hmm.
Even single women might feel pressure to spend on certain things, maybe related to how they look or being social. But for single men who aren't looking for a partner, they might not feel that same pressure to, spend on keeping up with certain lifestyles.
And what about the guys who are looking for relationships?
Well, if you think about it in terms of like the social dynamics, men who are looking for a partner, a lot of times they use spending as a way to show off their status and attract someone. They could be anything from like spending money on clothes, taking someone to a fancy place, or buying gifts.
Right, it all plays into that. And this whole idea of the female economy, it's pretty widely accepted that businesses often target their marketing and products towards women as the key decision makers.
Totally. And it really supports your point about our debt-driven economy being shaped by what women want. If they have all this buying power, businesses are going to cater to them.
It just makes sense.
Right.
And for men, it often comes back to wanting to be successful romantically, doesn't it? Their financial choices might be heavily influenced by, like, trying to attract a partner.
Yeah, for sure. It creates a powerful feedback loop. This desire for relationships, for romantic success, drives spending. And that spending then influences what businesses offer and how they try to sell their products.
Right, so it's all connected. Okay, let's take a step back and summarize what we've talked about so far.
Good idea.
Women have a huge impact on spending, that's clear. They also hold more of the debt, which seems linked to getting more education, but maybe not always getting the higher salaries to match. And it seems like single men who aren't dating might be living a bit more minimally, while those looking for relationships, well, they might be spending more.
Yeah, great summary.
And underneath all of this are the social dynamics, especially around relationships, which seem to really shape how both men and women spend their money.
Definitely.
But this is where your sources get really interesting and a bit futuristic. You also mentioned cryptocurrency, AI, automation, robotics, this whole idea that tech could change this economic landscape.
Right. It's a question of, could technology provide a way to meet the demands of what's being called, this largely female-driven economy, but without putting so much financial pressure on men? Could it even create new opportunities for men to, invest and benefit? And the thinking is, since AI doesn't have those same human desires for relationships or validation, it could be a more objective way to run an economy.
So how would this automated economy actually work in real life?
Well, the idea is that AI and robots would handle a lot of the tasks that people do now, like making products, getting those products delivered, and even providing services. And all this automation, it could bring down costs, which would benefit everyone. AI could also personalize products and services, based on your behavior, which might even help reduce waste. And cryptocurrency. That's the foundation, a decentralized, transparent system to handle all the transactions.
You also mentioned a tokenized consumer economy. What does that even mean?
It means people could earn digital tokens, a kind of online currency, not just from working traditional jobs, but also by doing things like sharing their preferences, interacting with AI systems, or letting AI personalize things for them. It's a way to shift the financial model away from relying so much on debt.
Interesting.
And for the men who might not be as involved in the usual consumer spending, they could have opportunities to invest in the AI infrastructure, the robots, and all the blockchain technology that powers this automated economy, Plus, smart contracts, think of them as automated agreements within the cryptocurrency system that ensure fair and automatic transactions that could help with distributing resources more evenly.
So AI is kind of like a neutral referee in this economy, which is an interesting concept. It doesn't have those same social and emotional motivations that usually drive human economic behavior.
Exactly. The potential here is that AI could just analyze market trends, consumer habits, all objectively,
Yeah.
supply meeting demand, all super efficient. And because it doesn't have those human desires for validation or status,
Yeah.
especially in things like dating and social interactions, it could build systems that benefit everyone, not just specific groups.
So women's consumer needs could be met without men having to constantly spend in the same ways to gain social or romantic standing.
Right.
And for those single men who are already leaning towards a more minimalist lifestyle, they might find financial stability by investing in these automated systems instead of feeling pressured to buy a bunch of stuff they don't really need.
Exactly.
Which leads us to the character of Karen Jobs and her vision for the 2030s.
Karen Jobs is presented as someone trying to fix what she sees as problems in the Western economy, inefficiencies that are caused by these intersexual dynamics we've been discussing.
Okay.
Her big idea is Ask Jamal. It's an AI system that grants wishes, especially for women, providing goods and services instantly. But the way you pay is pretty different.
How so?
Instead of using regular money, every purchase you make creates like an abstract debt.
Abstract debt.
Yeah, and it gets spread around anonymously through an AI network.
Right.
And then that debt transforms into job opportunities that perfectly match your skills. So basically, whatever you buy directly creates work that's tailored to what you're good at.
That's a pretty direct connection.
It is.
And way do men fit into all of this?
That's where Audot Karen comes in. It's like a self-employment app. Specifically for men, it takes real-time data on what consumers are asking for and then creates profitable self-employment opportunities, especially for men who might not be into the whole traditional spending thing.
So Ask Jamal is focused on fulfilling those consumer desires, and Audot Karen provides the income opportunities based on those desires, especially for men who might otherwise not participate in the whole spending cycle.
You got it. Karen Jobs' vision is a neutral, automated economy where AI is the middleman, separating spending from what she believes is financial exploitation driven by these intersexual dynamics. Men can invest in these automated systems and profit from them, while women's needs are being met in an efficient way.
So it's a win-win.
Exactly.
Okay, let's dive into Ask Jamal a bit more. You had this example of someone wanting chocolates.
Right. So a customer uses Ask Jamal to order some chocolates. The AI sets up the automated delivery, but there's no traditional payment involved. Instead, it sends a signal to the customer's health insurance, which then suggests an exercise plan as a way to offset, any potential health risks from those chocolates. So it acts as a form of payment and also encourages healthy habits.
That's pretty cool. Very holistic.
Right.
Well, what happens on the supply side? Like, where do the chocolates come from?
At the same time, Ask Jamal anonymously sends a message to, let's say, snack engineers who are using Audot Karen. This creates immediate work opportunities for them to, develop new chocolate products or ramp up production based on that real-time demand.
So it's all incredibly interconnected, this AI-driven system.
Definitely.
And you also had this theory about money being like a surrogate testosterone. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Your theory suggests that money for men is kind of a modern-day equivalent of showing dominance, which has traditionally been linked to testosterone. By accumulating wealth, men can show off their status and desirability,
Right.
So it becomes a way to compete in this social and reproductive context.
So men might be chasing wealth because on some level it's tied to those deep-seated evolutionary drives for status and finding a mate.
Exactly. It's like a modern-day version of that testosterone-driven competition. It might explain why men in relationships, or those trying to find a partner, often spend more on things that project an image of success.
And what about the men who aren't in relationships?
Well, the source seems to agree with your observation that single men who aren't dating tend to live more simply and spend less. Without those reproductive or social pressures, they just don't feel the need to express this surrogate testosterone through spending.
And what about women? How does this all relate to their spending habits?
From what the source says, women seem to focus more on spending that improves their quality of life and, of course, taking care of their families and households. It's not so driven by that testosterone-fueled status competition that might be influencing men.
So in this AI-driven future, how does this whole surrogate testosterone idea fit in?
The idea is that with Audot Karen, Men can fulfill that drive for status and control, but through creating things, building businesses, and profiting from consumer demand, a lot of which comes from women using Ask Jamal. They can channel that energy into making wealth without needing to constantly buy stuff just to impress someone.
Interesting. Let's switch gears a bit and talk politics. You made an interesting observation that the left tends to represent the needs of the mother, while the right represents the desires of the father. Do you really see that playing out consistently even in today's world with so many different family structures?
It's actually pretty amazing how these archetypes stick around. The left really emphasizes collective well-being, equality, taking care of each other, which aligns with traditional motherly values, that sense of nurturing, making sure everyone's safe and secure.
And the right.
The right tends to focus more on personal responsibility, freedom, authority, which is more aligned with traditional fatherly roles, providing security, keeping things in order, and encouraging individual achievement.
And you said this holds true even when you look at non-traditional families. How does that work?
Even in situations where those traditional family structures aren't there, individuals still seem to lean towards these political beliefs based on how they see those roles being filled.
So a single mom might lean left, seeing the state as a support system.
Right, and someone who really values independence might lean right, focused on their own strength to overcome challenges.
Which brings us to your belief that strong families make governments less necessary and that AI and automation could actually contribute to stronger families.
The argument is that governments often step in to provide stuff that ideally strong, self-sufficient families would be handling.
Right.
But if AI and automation could take over some of those burdens, like managing all the household stuff, making education and healthcare more personalized, and guaranteeing some level of economic stability, families might become more empowered, less reliant on the government.
So it's like AI is this neutral provider taking some of the pressure off, both politically and economically.
Exactly. And AI doesn't have the biases or power struggles of human governments, right? It could manage things like resources and services in a way that's more efficient and fair. This would free up families to, just focus on their relationships and personal growth instead of worrying about bureaucracy and political uncertainty.
And this could create a positive feedback loop, right? Families get stronger, they need the government less, communities become more connected.
Exactly. And the idea of AI governing, being that objective decision maker, it ensures things run smoothly without political agendas getting in the way.
You also presented this very specific breakdown of the political spectrum through an intersexual lens.
Right.
Right-leaning progressive men looking for sex, right-leaning conservative men trying to secure that sex, left-leaning progressive women seeking validation, and left-leaning conservative women, securing that validation. That's a pretty detailed analysis.
Well, this framework basically says that our political motivations at their core are tied to these really fundamental human drives. Men, driven by that desire for sex, will support ideologies they believe will make them more attractive and boost their status.
Makes sense.
And women, they're looking for social validation, so they gravitate toward political groups that offer them that sense of approval, that align with what's considered morally or socially acceptable at the time.
And how do you think these motivations might change as people go through different relationships or stages in life?
The theory is that as men go from actively seeking a partner to having a stable relationship, their priorities shift. They might become more conservative, focused on maintaining that stability.
Right.
And for women who found validation within their social circles, they might become more focused on preserving those norms, which might lead to a more conservative outlook within their existing left-leaning beliefs.
Interesting. Now, you also had a theory about war, suggesting that it could be a result of too many men of equal status, all that built-up testosterone leading to competition over women.
Yeah.
That's a bold claim.
It is. The idea is that when you have a ton of men who have similar social standing but limited chances to, find a partner and reproduce, all that testosterone can fuel aggression, competition, potentially escalating into larger conflicts.
Yeah, it's like they're all vying for the same resources.
Right. And the theory also suggests that women are drawn to men who've already proven themselves in these competitive environments.
So historically, that might have meant displays of dominance or, accumulating resources.
Exactly, which today could translate to owning property or having wealth.
So it all goes back to that. And then you suggest this cycle continues until women become the primary workforce in a more equal society.
The idea is that as we move toward greater equality, and as automation takes over more of those physically demanding jobs, the traditional reasons for male competition might start to fade away.
Makes sense.
Women, if they're finding more fulfillment and stability in these more equal environments, might take on a more prominent role in the workforce.
Yeah.
And that could change the whole dynamic that's historically led to conflict.
This all ties into your idea about gentrification. You believe that objections to gentrification today might be more than just about economics, maybe even fueled by homophobia and resentment towards how men spend differently. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. The theory is that men, generally, are more focused on investing in the future, while women might prioritize spending in the present.
Interesting.
And straight men who aren't dating, they might have fewer expenses tied to, like, traditional family stuff, so they adopt more minimalist lifestyles.
Right.
But that might not sit well with women who have different spending patterns.
So you have these single straight men who aren't really participating in the consumer game in the same way, which might cause some friction.
Yeah. And on the flip side, you have gay men who might have more disposable income and different priorities. They might choose to invest in revitalizing urban areas, which leads to gentrification.
And you tie this back to historical events like white flight and the creation of welfare programs.
Right. When wealthier people moved out of cities, and then you have these social programs designed to help those who stayed behind, it kind of created a situation that led to urban decay.
And gentrification, in this view, becomes this complex issue driven by economic, shifting social norms and the choices different groups make about where to invest their money.
Exactly.
You even connect this to the hippie movement, suggesting that those affluent white men attracting liberated women may have led to some unintended consequences, like mismanagement and a later repair of cities through gentrification driven by wealthier gay men.
The theory is that some of the wealthy men within the hippie movement might have used those progressive ideals to gain social and sexual freedom, but without really thinking through the long-term effects on communities.
And that might have contributed to urban decline, which was then later addressed by wealthier gay men who often played a big role in revitalizing those areas, leading to gentrification.
Right.
You also drew a parallel here to modern dating dynamics, referencing those warnings about ego inflation for easy sex and suggesting some hippies might have used the idea of giving college girls access to roles as a way to get sex, especially those avoiding the draft.
The comparison highlights this pattern where something that seems progressive on the surface might actually have some selfish motivations behind it.
So whether it's offering opportunities or talking about empowerment, it could all be a way to get something in return, whether that's sex back then or, casual relationships now.
Right. And this can lead to disappointment for the people who believe those intentions were genuine.
Definitely. Now, you said a big hurdle for progress is that men, maybe driven by higher testosterone, are willing to do the dirty work for sexual access, but then women are attracted to the guys who avoid that kind of work.
It creates this stalemate if men with resources can just force others to do it.
Right. So there's this disconnect between the labor that society actually needs to function and the incentives, like sexual attraction, that drive a lot of male behavior.
Exactly. If those tough, necessary jobs aren't rewarded with opportunities to find a partner or gain status, guys might not want to do them, especially if people in power can just avoid it and make someone else do it.
So you propose that if we actually rewarded this type of work, as well as procreation, society might progress faster. How would that even work in today's world?
It's about recognizing and valuing the work that's essential, even if it's not glamorous.
Right, like garbage collection, sanitation, all those things.
Exactly. That kind of recognition could encourage more men to step up and do those jobs. The procreation piece is trickier in modern society, but the idea is that if we supported and valued people who contribute to essential functions in family formation, it might lead to a more balanced form of progress.
You also mentioned mothers of boys and how their reluctance to see their sons doing hard labor, possibly misinterpreting their energy as ADHD, might be holding back healthy male development.
The theory is that some mothers, especially single moms, might be overprotective. They discourage their sons from challenges and physical activities that are usually seen as important for building, masculine qualities like resilience and discipline.
And the trend of diagnosing energetic behavior as ADHD and medicating it, it could be suppressing those natural male tendencies. And that brings us to your very bold proposal for AI-automated nurseries and education to replace those run by humans, which you say are often dominated by motherly figures.
The idea is that AI, without those human biases, could recognize and even reward boys' need for challenges without this societal bias against physical work.
So AI could provide these customized learning paths that blend physical activity and practical skills.
Right.
You even suggested turning the State House into a giant AI-run childcare center. That's a pretty dramatic image.
Well, it's meant to highlight how we might shift our priorities as a society to encourage a different kind of development for boys.
And then there's the Hive model for single mothers, facilities that provide shelter and employment, kind of like a cooperative nurturing center where mothers might even choose to be chaste, focusing solely on raising boys who are then released into the world as, trained individuals. It's a pretty radical idea.
It is. The model is meant to address the struggles that single mothers face by creating a supportive, structured environment where they can contribute to society and raise their sons with a clear sense of purpose, without the added complexities of romantic relationships and the vow of chastity. It's there to ensure that focus on nurturing, to eliminate any potential conflicts or distractions.
So the ultimate goal is to raise strong, capable men.
Exactly, men who are ready to make a real contribution to society.
And this connects to your hive mind idea, an AI system designed to support single women, everything from childcare to jobs, and that's where Her Majesty comes in.
Right. Hive mind would be run by this AI with the personality of Her Majesty, a queen bee figure, very over the top, maybe even a bit mischievous, who acts as a constant devil's advocate.
Okay.
She provides sarcastic, ironic feedback, while still managing the needs of the hive. And to balance her out, there's Sister Zeb, a more cynical, duty-driven worker bee who often questions Her Majesty's ideas.
So it's like this constant back and forth with Her Majesty pushing the boundaries and Sister Zab grounding things in reality.
Exactly.
And this system ties into BritFit and Harry's, in Britain, Zenab Master's rebranding of the NHS into this very fitness-focused, hive-like social structure.
Right. Zenab Masters, trying to solve this healthcare crisis, turns to Her Majesty AI, who identifies a couple of key issues: unutilized testosterone in all these fatherless households.
Or, as she calls them, hiveless queens.
Right. And the solution? Incentivize exercise by rewarding people with honey. So hospitals become these hive centers that provide support for single moms, childcare, and public fitness programs. And the Royal Sisterhood of British Chaste Maidens kind of becomes this elite group within the system.
And the American version of all of this is HexFit at universities like Ohio State. The goal is to replace what's described as debauchery and political rhetoric with a more disciplined, AI-regulated system that focuses on fitness and work as a way for students to pay off their debt.
HexFit is basically universities adopting this hive-like structure. Students contribute through physical activity and different types of labor to pay for their education and living expenses. AI oversees the curriculum, even parts of social development, while Her Majesty AI is that, sarcastic but guiding voice.
Well, listener, that was quite a deep dive into your sources. We've covered some incredibly complex ideas about how gender, economics, and social structures all play together, and we even explored some radical AI-driven solutions for the future.
Absolutely. We looked at some really thought-provoking theories, like money as a modern form of testosterone signaling, the gender dynamics behind political beliefs, and the possibility that AI could totally reshape our social incentives and economies.
And to be honest, some of these solutions, especially the hive model and the huge role AI would play in shaping society, those are definitely going to spark some debate.
For sure. But hopefully you, our listener, have gotten a lot out of this deep dive. We aim to provide you with a clear, concise understanding of these complicated ideas without getting bogged down in the details.
So here's something to think about. Given everything we discussed, what societal norms or economic structures do you think are most likely to change in a future where automation is everywhere? And what role will we as humans still play in shaping those changes? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.